We are witnessing a terrifying outbreak of war in Iran and across the Middle East over recent days. Strikes on schools and infrastructure, citizens locked down, flights cancelled, global chaos. At the outset, I will say what you and your government colleagues have so far failed to say. The attacks carried out by the United States and Israel represent a flagrant breach of international law. Their bombardment of Iran is illegal and should be condemned. It should be condemned by you, Taoiseach. Of course, the Iranian regime is tyrannical. It is deeply repressive. It has murdered thousands of its own civilians over recent months. And Labour have consistently condemned the Iranian regime. We've consistently supported pro-democracy and women's rights campaigners in Iran. Indeed, I've been publicly condemned by the Iranian ambassador to Ireland because I criticised his depraved whitewash of the murder of teenager Mahsa Amini by so-called morality police in Iran. I brought Irish citizen Bernard Phelan here to Leinster House, Taoiseach, to speak about his illegal and brutal incarceration by Iran in the so-called Satan's Block prison wing. So we in Labour have no truck with the Iranian regime. But two things can be true at once, Taoiseach. We can oppose and condemn an authoritarian regime, yet still insist that international law is upheld. And indeed, when we see the erosion of democracy and creeping fascism in different countries across the world, it becomes all the more important for us to uphold the rule of law resolutely and steadfastly. And you must acknowledge that. Yet you cannot bring yourself to condemn outright these attacks. Instead, you engage in what I would say is doublespeak, Taoiseach. You speak critically about the UN. You say you're a multilateralist, but you criticise the United Nations, which, while imperfect, represents the embodiment of a multilateral world order, of multilateralism and the rule of law. And worse again, in a fortnight, you're going to genuflect before the man responsible for this global disorder. And you'll do so in the name of the people of Ireland, all without offering any principled criticism of Trump's warmongering. And it is warmongering. Trump's war has consequences, Taoiseach. 200 children killed in a strike on an Iranian primary school. 25,000 Irish citizens stranded, trapped in countries across the Middle East as they experienced appalling and illegal bombing by Iran. And we're all waiting to learn what exactly Trump means when he says, we haven't even started hitting them hard. Terrifying words. A chaotic White House, which is destabilising what was already a tinderbox in the Middle East, destroying innocent lives, disrupting the global economy, pushing the most vulnerable people into harsh poverty. Here in Ireland, energy bills skyrocketing already. Liveline hearing yesterday from people frazzled, racing against the real-time price gouging that we're seeing with home heating oil. Forced to plan for yet more wartime inflation, just 4 years after Putin's brutal war in Ukraine. And we can't then credibly see you engage in plastic paddy pageantry, not while hiding behind vague language. So, Taoiseach, will you condemn the US and Israeli action as a breach of international law? And what are you doing to safeguard Irish citizens in the region and ensuring de-escalation?
Hear, hear.
Sorry, on a number of fronts. First of all, we're very clear in terms of upholding the international rule of law. This bombing campaign was not in accordance with a UN mandate. And I would say to you also that the UN, and you must agree, and I, by the way, I accept your bona fides totally, you have been consistent on Iran, but the international rules-based order has been powerless to do anything about Iran, if we're honest, over a long, long period of time. And that does raise questions. And it's not a new question. It's a decades-old question. In terms of intervention. And there's been previous interventions by previous American presidents and with consequences that were long-lasting in a negative sense. So we know all of that. But equally, regimes equally have been allowed, and sanctions haven't been enough to shift those regimes into facilitating democracy within their jurisdictions, or indeed at least allowing their civilians to have freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and indeed opportunities to change by democratic channels. I mean, as you described in terms of Mahsa Amini and the brutal put-down of that protest, which was about the liberation of women within Iran, it was brutal. And the world was powerless. And the world did nothing. Only 6 weeks ago, thousands, we haven't full estimates. Some say it could be as high as 15,000, some say 10,000 ordinary Iranians executed for just protesting. So there are moral dilemmas everywhere here. And I take your basic point. We don't believe in intervention without a UN mandate. As I said, we don't. That's no one's even disputing that. But equally, there is a huge issue with this regime, and the challenges are, as you say, in terms of instability across the region, and that's why we're calling for a de-escalation and getting back around the negotiating table. These negotiations on nuclear file has been going on certainly since the mid-2000s. Sorry, not mid-2000, back to 2007, 2005. That period. That's how long they've been going on, and dragged out and so on the ballistic program and so on like that. And in terms of, and I met Bernard Phelan as well, where at will the Iranian regime, that's just those who've been, they just kidnapped European citizens, put them into prison, and then ransomed or blackmailed Western governments to try and get them released. That was the modus operandi. And Bernard Phelan had a very brutal enough imprisonment, and colleagues that he knew or people that he had met in prison who didn't get out, some yet to get out of those particular prisons. I'll come back to the other issues later.
Well, Taoiseach, I think we can all agree there are no good guys here. But the Iranian regime is brutal. We've utterly condemned it. But so too is the Israeli and US attacks on Iran illegal. And we should be able to say that very clearly. Indeed, the Spanish Prime Minister, Socialist Prime Minister in Spain, has been very clear in condemning the attacks, in refusing to allow Spanish bases to be used by the US. So why can't we have that clarity here? Instead, as I said, you engage in a sort of doublespeak, condemning or rather criticising the UN, yet failing to recognise that, in fact, there has been an effective use of multilateral institutions in containing and reducing and diminishing Iran's nuclear capabilities. Why can we not work with the multilateral institutions we have? Why can we not hear the Irish government condemning clearly the US-Israeli strikes as in breach of international law? There is, I think, Taoiseach, a clear indication that you're soft-pedalling a national response in fear of upsetting Washington ahead of Patrick's Day. I think that has to be the conclusion that we all must draw. And the Irish people are not fools. I think that's what we're seeing here.